good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Cooper Union, to the Great Hall, and welcome to the inaugural Making Home lecture series. This is a lecture series that is in collaboration between two institutions, the Cooper Union that you are in right now, and the Cooper Hewitt. My name is Benjamin Aranda. I'm part of the faculty here at the Cooper Union School of Architecture. And standing next to me is Alexandra Hakowski, Curator of Public Programs at the Cooper Hewitt, who will introduce in a second our inaugural Making Home with lecture. But first, I just wanted to give you a little context for this evening, what it's about. You know, you are in this lovely building we call the Foundation Building. Cooper Union was founded in 1859 by Peter Cooper, and it's founded on the belief that education should be free and accessible to everyone, no matter, regardless of race, religion, gender, and economic status. And in line with this progressive mission, this great hall has been a historic site for the expression of ideas, some considered radical at their time, including the abolitionist Frederick Douglass, suffragist Susan B. Anthony, and the Oglala Dakota leader Red Cloud. All came and talked here. And it is in this room's tradition of free expression and civil discourse that we humbly continue tonight. I have the distinct honor of welcoming Cooper Hewitt back home. And I say back home because we have a shared beginning. Many of you might not know this, but the Cooper Hewitt was founded in 1897 by Sarah and Eleanor Hewitt. They were the granddaughters of Peter Cooper, who founded the school that I teach at. And it was also imagined to be a free and accessible museum, a kind of practical working laboratory for students, designers, and the general public to come and use. And this is the plan of the building. This is the fourth floor, actually. You can see how it was used at the time. And in 1969, the Carnegie Corporation donated their mansion on the Upper East Side as the new home for the museum, and the Smithsonian acquired the Cooper Union Museum of Arts and Decorations collection, and eventually that became what you all know as the Cooper Hewitt. So yeah, the Cooper Hewitt was in this building for almost 100 years, and has been at the Carnegie Mansion for the last 54. So that's a little context. I'm so honored to be able to welcome the Cooper Hewitt here, and now I'll pass it over to my colleague, Alexandra Hakowski, the Curator of Public Programs.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, when we first started putting this lecture series together, we were like, wait, this is not the first time that we collaborated. So cheers to the Coopers. So as mentioned, this is the first of 4 lectures in the Making Home lecture series here at Cooper Union. And Ben and I are so excited to share tonight and the 3 other lectures coming up in the semester of 2025, spring semester of 2025. Starting January through April. They're all free, and they feature the Making Home Smithsonian Design Triennial exhibition participants, paired with designers, artists, professionals, and Cooper Union faculty, discussing the exhibition's exploration of home, its relation to data, justice, history, and building. If you haven't seen the show yet at the museum, I invite you all to stop by. I know we're downtown. I know the Upper East Side is a little bit far away, but we're on 91st and 5th Ave. I promise it's worth the visit. Come on up. There are 25 site-specific installations taking over the whole museum, exploring design's role in shaping the physical and emotional realities of home across the United States, U.S. territories, and tribal nations. One of our hopes for the triennial programming was to really activate the city, not just the museum, to include more people and organizations in our discussion, which brings us here to the Cooper Union today, and again throughout the coming months through April. Tonight, you will hear from one of the co-curators and participants who are just 4 of the hundreds of people who have collaborated to make the exhibition come to life. If you'd like to follow along and join other upcoming programming, head to the museum's website. We also have a newsletter. Sign up, follow along. There's lots in store. Would like to extend a heartfelt thanks to everyone here at Cooper Union, including Ben and Haley and Mauricio, who has helped us a lot bringing everything together tonight. Thank you. And at that, I'll hand it over to Christina de León, co-curator of the exhibition, who will tell you a bit more about how it came to be and introduce patterns of life. The installation, who the makers are here, Mona Chalabi, Martina Duque Gonzalez, and Gori Bahugun. Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina de León. I want to begin by thanking Cooper Union for being such incredible partners and hosts, and to Alexandra Halkowski, my colleague at Cooper Hewitt, and Benjamin Aranda and Mauricio Higuera here at Cooper Union for all of their immense work in organizing this program. And of course, thank you to all of you for making it here today. This is so exciting to see so many new faces and to be able to share a bit about the show and obviously about this project in particular. I'm here this evening with data journalist Mona Chalabi here in the middle, along with members of SITU Research, architectural designer Martina Duque Gonzalez, who coincidentally is a recent graduate of Cooper Union, and Gori Bahuguna, who is a computational designer and serves as SITU Research's deputy director. So before we dive into our conversation today, I feel like it's really important for me to just begin by providing a bit of an overview of Making Home Smithsonian Design Triennial. For those of you who are familiar with Cooper Hewitt, the Design Triennial is an exhibition series that we have been doing since the year 2000. Every 3 years, we sort of do this survey show of what is going on in contemporary design. And those exhibitions have varied greatly since the year 2000, both in geographic scope and also in themes and in materiality that is showcased. It's been very object-based in the past. The past few triennials have had the theme of beauty, of nature, most recently. And so with that sort of history said, this show, this iteration of the triennial is quite different. It sort of moves away from showcasing objects by a large variety of makers throughout the United States and also internationally, to really focus on a very expansive theme like home. We don't define home. Maybe that's like a sneaky way of the curators sort of, you know, giving the labor to the participants to define. As Ben mentioned, we are housed in the Andrew Carnegie former family mansion. So Cooper Hewitt is housed in a former home. And one of the things that the curatorial team wanted to do, which includes myself, Alexandra Cunningham Cameron, and our colleague, Michelle Joan Wilkinson, who is a curator at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, was to reflect the idea of home while also revealing our home, the mansion in which Cooper Hewitt inhabits, which is a very particular type of architecture. And you know, it's a very it was a very ambitious idea to take over the entire building, not just with a lot of different projects, but for it to be all commission based. And what that means is that all of the installations that are featured in Making Home were made specifically for the museum, for this exhibition, and revealed to the public for the first time. So we decided to make it super hard for ourselves, very complicated, very ambitious. But I think what you'll see, and I'll just go through a few images, is how every participant, which also includes a large range of people, architects, designers, data journalists, researchers, musicians, are taking over every single room. They each have a room to transform and to essentially delve into what they want to when thinking about the theme of home. Here you have Heather Dewey Hagborg, whose installation is a biobank, a home, also really sort of pushes the boundaries of what do we define as home. The show is broken up into 3 themes: going home, seeking home, building home. This installation is focused on the second floor. Just clicking here. Patterns of Life is situated on the second floor with the theme of seeking home. Seeking home is the floor that has the most expansive definition of home. It's a floor that looks at the body as home, even our institutions as home. In one installation, we have participants that are examining the Smithsonian as home for cultural heritage. So it's a floor that really pushes us to think about home in ways that perhaps feel familiar, but also might feel very very uncomfortable or different, or not something that you would automatically associate with a home. One of the things that is also distinct about this iteration of Triennial is the fact that we are focusing on the United States, US territories, and tribal nations. And one of the reasons why we wanted to do that, particularly as a Smithsonian institution, was to really think about, really peel back the layers on what does it mean to live under US sovereignty and influence. It's a complex question to really answer, because there are so many types of experiences that people are having throughout the nation today. And we really wanted to use this triennial as an opportunity, as an invitation for the participants to showcase their ideas, their feelings, their experiences, their viewpoints of what home is to them today in the 21st century. So with that very long overview, I want to turn it to Patterns of Life and talk a little bit about how we came to this. Mona, you and I, and along with Alexandra and Michelle, we talked about a lot of different ideas, so many ideas about what an installation could be. We were really drawn to the idea of having data visualization, but one of the first things we said to you was, this is installation based, it's immersive. What can we do that feels in line with your practice, but is also pushing the boundaries of what you do every day? So if maybe we can begin with you talking a little bit about how we came to this idea of patterns of life, and also how you came to work with SITU Research.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here, Christina, and for inviting me to be a part of the triennial. Those early conversations were really, really wide ranging. We talked about all kinds of different things. And I guess in describing how we landed on the final theme that we chose, there's kind of two answers that I could give. One is saying that this distinction between the domestic and the foreign, I think, is actually quite flimsy. And so it felt really, really important to talk about the way that yes, people might be sitting in homes over here, but the US is ultimately also responsible for the destruction of homes elsewhere. And I wanted the opportunity to talk about that. And then the other answer is that we were having these conversations in tandem while domicide was taking place very, very, very visibly in Gaza. And that without a doubt also informed the decision of what to focus on. SITU Research felt like a really, really natural partner in this. So SITU has got 3 divisions, right? I guess if you want to call it that. There's the fabrication team, and I definitely could not have fabricated this myself. No way, no how. So that was really, really helpful. You know, having this architectural background, which is not a background that I have, I really, really felt like I needed to lean on that expertise. But more than anything, actually, SITU Research, as a data journalist, I'm often just working by myself, which is whether it's lonely, but it's more than that, it's terrifying because there's so little support to actually fact check you. So not only was I given that support, but also SITU Research were able to find primary sources and look in places that I wasn't even aware of. So it just felt like a really, really good collaboration. Yeah.
And Gori, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about provide the audience a bit of a background of what SITU Research does, the work that you have done in the recent past, and how this project Patterns of Life sort of falls into that framework.
Yes, thank you, Christina. So SITU Research is a visual investigations practice, and visual investigations is kind of this amorphous or emerging field where a very diverse group of people, researchers, use disparate forms of data. So everything from geospatial information, audiovisual material, alphanumeric data, and combine that together to create concise and coherent visualizations, typically of contested narratives. So that's typically, we work with large human rights organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, but also in legal contexts. So we've done work with the ICC in the past, and this project and the theme of domicide actually ties into that international law piece quite naturally. So when we got brought onto the project, Mona already had the idea to reconstruct homes that were destroyed by US manufactured weapons. And then in our initial conversations, it became clear that what was just as fundamental as recreating the homes and the memories of the individuals was tying this to larger patterns and policies of the US military, and, you know, demonstrate that this is not stuff that happens in isolation, but it's kind of programmed into how the military operates. And what they're doing is domicide. Domicide being defined currently as the widespread and systematic destruction of homes. And home here means a lot more than private property, which is the only thing that is actually protected under international law. So if there's crimes that relate to the destruction of housing, it's because it's private property, and there isn't that more expansive definition of home, which I think the models speak to clearly. Did I cover everything?
Yeah. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about domicide, because when you first proposed this idea of focusing on, well, it was a few things, right? One was that the show is focused on the United States, U.S. territories, and tribal nations. So the fact that we wanted to think about how we could also show the ways in which the U.S. has influence abroad was sort of a big thing that we wanted to tackle and think about. And when you first proposed the project and you used the word domicide, it's not a word that like most people are familiar with. It's not a term that is used often. And so one of the things that I think felt really important about this proposal was using this as an opportunity to talk about what domicide is and its importance, not just in relation to the United States and its influence abroad, but as an international issue that is gaining, more and more attention, particularly within the United Nations. So I wonder if you could talk, either Mona or Rory could talk a little bit more about, the idea of domicide and how domicide is beginning to gain much more attention, and also what makes domicide different from herbicide and other ecological destruction that's happening across the world.
So just up top, herbicide is just one scale up of domicide. So it's the mass destruction of cities. So if you think about Mariupol and of course Gaza, that's also herbicide. And then ecocide is the damage to environment. So they're just kind of one scale up from each other. They're linked. Domicide with the US, they have a pretty strong legacy, right? As far as back as aerial warfare goes, the US has been bombing countries all over the world, right? Korea, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. I mean, it goes on. And I think part of the reason why that domicide is not currently part of international law is because the US would be opening itself up to a lot of accusations of domicide, which would be appropriate. It's similar to what happened with the genocide being passed into international law. And I think what's happening now in the wake of Ukraine and Gaza is a push in the UN, especially with the special rapporteur to the right to adequate housing, Mr. Balakrishnan Rajagopal, who Mona and our director, Brad Samuels, interviewed. So that advocacy effort is ongoing to get this codified into international law. And I think our project wanted to demonstrate and speak to the systematic and widespread part of the definition of domicide and use the details of each of the individual cases and draw from primary sources. So this is documentation from the US military, after action reports, policies, target approval processes, things like that, to tie it to this domicide claim.
I guess I would also say that this timeline of US domicide could also be extended right back to the creation of the US, and you could say that this country is founded on the basis of domicide and the destruction of Native American homes, which also highlights in a way that this distinction between domicide and herbicide and ecocide is messy at best. Again, in the case of Gaza, where you have such concentrated areas of civilian housing, where are you drawing the line between the destruction of housing and the destruction of a city? And there's obviously so many other terms as well. Scholasticide to describe the destruction of educational institutions. I'm not actually sure what the term is for the destruction of healthcare facilities, but I'm sure that there is a term. And this is something that Balakrishnan Rajagopal speaks to really, really well. So we connected with him quite early on, and he is the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing, as Gori said. And he's amazing, even though he works for the UN. Not that working for the UN is a bad thing at all, but just. It's not and he has, for example, been very, very explicit about the fact that he believes there is a genocide happening in Gaza. And part of that conclusion is tied to his understanding of domicide. And what's interesting is that, again, when we were interviewing him for the book, his background and how he became interested in this. And I believe he studied architecture, right? I think he was an architecture student. And while he was studying in India, he saw that the construction of a major dam in India was resulting in the forced displacement of many, many, many people, and that all of these migrants isn't the right word. These were like internally displaced people who had been moved to his city as a result of the construction of this dam. So it's worth saying that domicide isn't always about a military, it's not always militaristic in nature. This was like prompted by like an economic motive. And he very quickly, I think, became interested in domicide. He talks about how 2 Canadian researchers coined this term. And he is also someone who is really, really critical of international law. And interviewing him so fascinating because I wouldn't say critical of international law, I feel quite disillusioned by its ability to do anything. And he, as someone who is working within this system, also feels disillusioned. But he has been so supportive of the exhibition. It's been amazing. And I think he sees it as that he talks about how people kind of imagine that they kind of conflate international law with domestic law in the sense that they think that once international law says something, like, the bad guys there'll be some form of like retribution or punishment or something. There'll be some kind of consequences, and that people are very often disappointed because they don't see those consequences materialize. But he talks about how international law can also serve to delegitimize certain policies, certain actors. And I think that's part of what he's campaigning for when he's calling for domicide to be recognized, is that certain foreign policies, to even call them foreign policies, agendas, can't just be treated as legitimate. And I think, I don't know, it's just really, really good to work with him on this, yeah.
I wonder if you can talk a bit about how all of you went about selecting the home. So there are 3 cities that are the focus of the installation: Mosul, Iraq, Mom Beach, Syria, and Gaza, Palestine. And the destruction, and so what we have is two viewpoints: the viewpoints of the destruction that happened in the city, and then from the individual point of view of 3 homes. So how did you go about, I think maybe first selecting these 3 cities in particular, because as all of you have made the point, domicide is occurring all over the world, from different actors. So why these 3 places?
Just really quickly say that, again, very, very long list. Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, Pakistan, again, Native American lands. As with so much of my work, it's just also determined by what is available to us. So we were also working with, where we could find information and data, which I think Corey can speak to in much more detail. But we were also really lucky. Joanna Naples-Mitchell, who is here tonight, is a lawyer who works at Zomia Center, who also helped to connect us with the families. And, we could have never ever made this if we didn't also have families that were willing to speak to us about their experiences of domicide and work with us to reconstruct their homes. So that also really, really informs which cities we ended up choosing.
Yeah, I think from the data point of things, we were interested in cases or places where we would have access to documentation or these primary documents that we were interested in. However, it was also impacted by which families were willing to participate. So we were actually going to do Kabul in Afghanistan instead. And that case had the most documentation and like almost could not ask for better primary material for a strike. But that didn't necessarily fit with the definition of domicide that we were working with. And so we switched in Manbij, Syria, and there's no information. And I think we had internal conversations where it's like, okay, now we can use the absence of information, also this contrast between the cases. The Mosul case has a lot of documentation because he has access, or he had access to resources. There was a lot of journalism pieces out about it. So it really, I think each case demonstrates the level of difference and opacity of some of these policies.
Can you talk a little bit more about each case, each city, and each family? And I think this is really interesting, right? You're talking about the data that's available to you. And in some cases, it's a lot, and there's so much to take from. And then you are also pairing that with people's stories, and there's a balance there. Can you talk a little bit about each case, each city, and maybe some of the challenges in finding that balance between having a lot of data, which I think sometimes can feel very cold, right? Like if it was just an installation of like facts and documents, I think it would be still very strong, but the inclusion of these personal accounts takes it somewhere else. So if you can talk a little bit more about that process in choosing the cities and also the families, and those challenges also in interviewing. You all spent quite a bit of time interviewing each of these families, and we'll talk a little bit more about how those interviews play into the making of these models. But yeah, I think it would be really great if you can talk a little bit more about that process.
Okay, I think the first part of the question was to describe each case briefly. So starting with Mosul, this was a precision strike on Basim's home in 2015, September 2015. The US military initially claimed that it was an ISIL headquarters, and that's why the strike was approved. However, there was a lot of writing that happened. So I think he's related to a New York Times journalist who published something actually just a couple of weeks after the strike itself. And then it starts off this civilian casualty investigation that's part of the military policy, where they determined that, oh yes, all of our evidence was not credible at all, and we killed 4 people and destroyed these homes. So that was Mosul. Then Manbij, where we really don't know the specifics of why Osman's apartment building was targeted. It was part of this grander offensive to liberate Manbij from ISIL forces as part of the United States military operation called Operation Inherent Resolve, which is a little ridiculous. And then for Gaza, again, we don't have information about why this particular home was targeted, but looking at satellite imagery, we can see that the payload of the weapon that was used was not precise. So this was like kind of an indiscriminate attack, you might say. And that's kind of the information we had for each case.
Yeah, I just they are all very, very different cases. In the case of Manbij, actually, the home wasn't totally destroyed, and so it was very severely damaged. And the resident there, Abu Yusuf, his instinct was to go back to his home and try to rebuild, which is honestly most people's instinct. But we still wanted to include it because obviously so much is lost. Even when your home is that badly destroyed, and there are massive economic implications as well as psychological implications to going back to the site of a home that was so badly damaged. He described some of the items that he lost that we might see images of a few of it, but for example, he had a library of 2,000 books. When he went back, he was only able to find 2 of those. His father worked at a meatpacking district in a meatpacking factory, or a meat preparation factory. And in his spare time, he created, he was a carpenter, and he would make these items out of wood, these sculptures of animals. And his father had passed away, and in the rubble, all he was able to find was one of those sculptures with its head snapped off. And those kinds of losses very often obviously get lost in the military reports and everything else. The 3 families also come from very different economic backgrounds. So Basim is by far the wealthiest, which is part of the reason why his case has also managed to get some kind of publicity, some kind of visibility. He's had the means and the ability to pursue that. I just want to briefly talk about Basim in a little bit more detail. That Basim not only lost his home, which was a really precious home. He had lived there since he was since he was a child, and it was a small farmhouse that he had developed as he had acquired wealth himself. But far more importantly than that, in the US bombing, his wife was killed, his daughter was killed, and his nephew was killed. This is one of the really, really, really exceptionally rare cases where the US admitted, we fucked up, basically. Like, this had nothing to do with ISIS. We should not have targeted this home. I'm nervous I'm going to get the number wrong because I know that the number was changed, but the US military in this exceptional circumstance did offer some form of what they call compensation, as Raj makes the case. But I think it went 15 and then okay, $9,000. Which is, I mean, I don't even need to describe the ways in which that is just so abhorrent. Basim also lives with chronic pain as well as a result of the bombing. He's got, you know, back pain, chronic injuries, chronic pain. So yeah, and that's a really, really exceptionally rare circumstance where they even offered that. Obviously, he refused, and he is still fighting for more. But you know, it doesn't come close to his loss. And he wants, and I hope this goes without saying, but I'm just I'm listening to this. Have you listened to the podcast from the New Yorker at the moment about what's it called, Shafia? It's about one of the villages that the US military utterly destroyed in Iraq. And Basim's home, by the way, I should say, is from Mosul in Iraq. Anyway, the military commanders are talking about how all of these Iraqis, they just want money. That's all that they want. And so it feels unnecessary to say, but I just want to say Basim is pursuing this money, honestly, not for himself. It's about the recognition of what the US has done. And then what else was I going to say? Oh, just the interviewing process, just really, really briefly, because I think we might come to it a little bit later on, I'm not sure. But it's really hard to interview people about losing their homes. And journalistically, you get so little training for this. This is somebody who's obviously experienced a massive bereavement. One of the things that I wanted to do that is, again, parting ways with like traditional journalistic methods is I really felt it was important to pay the interviewees for their time. It's not a massive sum. Everyone was paid $40 per hour for their time. And again, in traditional journalism, in basically all journalism, that's viewed as dangerous because there is this idea that if you are paid for what you say, that makes you an unreliable narrator somehow. But journalists are paid for what they say and we are trusted to say what we say. I really don't buy it. So it felt important to do that. And again, it's a really small sum, but it's just recognition. Otherwise, it can so often feel exploited, like extraction. You're going and you're asking people for their stories and you're doing something with it. And then that's it. Yeah.
So with that said, I think maybe now is a good time to talk a bit about the process of recreating these homes and creating these series of 3 models. I'm going to pass over the clicker to you, Martina. Because Martina, you worked very closely with obviously Mona and Gori to use these interviews to help use this data to recreate and model these homes. One of the first things we said as a curatorial group was no models. We said, we're doing a show on design, no models. There are definitely models in the show. And these are not the only ones. But these models, I think, are using very traditional ideas around making models, architectural models, but also sort of pushing the boundary of what does it mean to create an architectural model. So Martina, I wonder if you could talk a bit about this process of recreating each of these homes and using the data that you had. There are a lot of different types of materials that you used in this process. So yeah, if you could just maybe start us off.
Sure. I actually think Gori should go first because she was she and Sam, who worked on the SITU team, did a lot of the laborious work of finding the locations of the home, which without that it would have been impossible to model. As eager as I'm to describe them. But maybe Gori, you can start about the geolocation and then I'll keep going.
Yeah. Also, yes, to acknowledge and shout out Sam Rabia, absolutely instrumental in not just the geolocation process, which is what I'll describe in a bit, but also the
building relationships with the families and assisting with the interviews as far as I know. But for the geolocation, again, we didn't have precise coordinates for each of the homes, or especially the Gaza home. We just knew a neighborhood, and then Sam really spent a lot of time on Google Earth looking for things that matched the pictures. I don't think we have an image of that up. Oh, this one is Mosul, but it was using the few, and we had very few images sent to us by the family, and distinct features in that, and trying to map it to what he could see on Google Earth. And that, again, we wanted to be sure that we were, modeling the right home, because we get the dimensions of the buildings, of the homes, through this remote sensing information. And then using the pictures is how the 3D models started, and interviews, and Martina will tell you the rest.
Yeah, I'll go back a little. Yeah, the availability of data was the kind of conditions we were working under. So each home had more information, more photographs than others. For Gaza, we had a lot of photographs of the exteriors, the interiors, before and after the destruction. For Manbij, we had a lot of photographs of the exterior, but almost no photographs of the interior. And for Mosul, we had, I'll show the picture in a bit, but we also had pictures of the destruction, but we had very little photographs of the outside before the destruction. So, the families provided some hand-drawn sketches, as you can see. This is the home in Mosul, and this is Manbij, right? Or is this, yeah. And during the interview process, Mona also sort of walked the families through a mural board where they would describe on top of their sketch where the beds were, where all of their objects were. And so it was a back and forth between, what the families could recollect of what they had in their homes, and also, all of the work that SITU did of finding the actual coordinates and using the photographs that we have of each home to reproduce somewhat with as much fidelity as possible. So yeah, I'll use the Mosul home as an example. This photograph on your left is the only photograph that we had of the home before its destruction on the outside. And, because of the decisions we made of what part of the house we were modeling for the show, we actually had no photographs of the side we were modeling. So, we had to do some triangulation with the other sources. We knew where the windows were because of the hand sketch. And so we had to do some kind of inferences of what the windows would look like, what the detailing would look like on the other side. And, hopefully got it as close as it was to reality. But this home in particular had a lot of, I wouldn't say guesswork, like educated guesswork as to what the other side of the home would be, because this was all we really had to work with, and the sketch that Bazim provided. And also then, the destruction photographs were really hard to work with because you can't really see much of the home. But we could pull some details from that as well. This home had this kind of tiling on the roof, which we then included in the model, which honestly, because of the destruction, it was one of the first things you would notice in the photographs, because you can see it here, how the tiles just kind of fell into the rubble. So, getting it to as close as we could. Although for Gaza and for Manbij, it was quite easy, and I would say looks almost exactly like the homes because we had much more photographic evidence to work with. And then these are some of the first tests that we did with SITU fabrication. Didi Rapp is out there somewhere, and he was the main point of contact that we worked with on the fabrication side, getting the detailing as best as we could. And here's a picture of this is the Mosul home as well, being delivered.
Can you talk about what the models are made of?
Yeah, it's PVC board, which is a kind of like foam, really dense foam core. And one of the discussions that we had while making the models was the kind of stark contrast of the white architectural model, which in the beginning was what we wanted, with the interiors, which are quite soft and colorful. In the end, we decided to color the outside as well. But yeah, we wanted this kind of dialogue of the traditional architectural model and, you know, representing the life in it as well. So we went with like an all white palette that then we kind of made not as white.
Yeah, I think what is very striking about these models in particular, besides the fact that you know, as models, they're so beautifully fabricated. But then when you look inside of the models, it's not what you're expecting from a traditional type of architectural model. And that's from a few things, right? It's the scale. Everything is quite large. The idea is that you can literally peek into each of these models and have this very intimate encounter with each of the homes. And then, of course, the materiality of the interiors. So can you talk a bit more about the rendering of the interiors and the materials that were used and all of that?
Sure. Mona said this thing that stuck with me throughout the whole thing in one of our first discussions about, you know, if, and I guess I'll ask you the question that she asked me, but if you were to go home today and your home had been destroyed, would you have any photographs of it? And if you didn't, how much would you be able to describe? And that was really the condition that we were working from, is not only an absence of photographic data to work with for the interiors, but also, you know, people describing what they remember of their homes. And so the question of how do you represent space as a memory was kind of the goal for the interiors. And so that was what we were looking for when we were choosing the material. We wanted something that was translucent. We wanted something that was also organic, something that moved when people walked through, and something that would sort of fade out as, you know, you layered up. And we did lots of tests, and we landed on this silk organza. And I won't go like very nitty gritty into the actual labor of it. But yeah, I'll show some process images of, you know, once we had settled on this material, just like testing, you know, what the color would look like, what the layers would look like, what the rooms would look like, and, you know, testing it with light in the room, which, you know, in the end, we'll land on some photographs of the final models, but we really wanted to illuminate the room so that it would feel like somebody was home as people kind of approached the models, and dealing with visibility. So we came up with this process of printing 2 layers of the fabric and then quite laboriously cutting out all of the shapes of the fabric and then attaching them onto the fabric, so that when you see each of the planes of, you know, the furniture or the beds or the wallpaper, the actual sheet feels very translucent, but the objects are very present in the room. So it was, it took a village. This is a process photo of some paper tests that we did with Mona, where she was doing the illustrations, seeing how the objects felt in the room, how they felt together in the model, and also then deciding how we wanted to layer out all of the pieces of fabric. And yeah, and thank you to everybody who helped us make this model. A lot of Cooper Union trained hands had helped make this together. So it's special to share this here, where I learned how to make models. But yeah, these are some of the illustrations for Manbij, some of the fabric tests, and yeah, maybe with these, Mona, I actually think it would be interesting to talk about the illustration process as well, how you, because for some rooms, especially in Gaza, we had photographs of almost all of the rooms, but for most of the rooms, we had no photographs. So I'm interested in how the illustration process worked for the rooms that you did have photos and the ones you didn't, and just, yeah.
Martina. So some of it was inference. This is the Manbij home, and as I mentioned, this is actually a representation of the wooden sculpture that he described to us. This is taken from one of the few photographs he did have of the wooden sculpture that was made by his father. I'll also say that the order in which the silk pieces are placed is also quite intentional. So like more important memories are placed in the foreground, less important ones are in the background. Some of it was just inference. So yeah, he talked so much about his relationship with his father. So I created like a little illustration of a father and son in there. There's a framed degree certificate, you know, it's things that came out again during the interview, but also there was a back and forth with families as well about these representations. Do you feel that this is appropriate? Do you feel that this is accurate? Two last things I'll say, I guess, about the silk is that it was also really important. I don't know if you're going to come to this later. I hope I'm not taking a point away from you about the movement thing. Yeah. So we really wanted this idea actually of the fabric to move, again, hinting at this idea of that memory being, I wouldn't even say fallible, but just constantly evolving and constantly changing. And so as you walk past these models in the museum, like these pieces of silk do move. They all hang to the same length within the rooms, but they move. And then the other thing that I really wanted to say that sounds really, really dumb is that pretty was a really important goal here. You know, it was so easy in some ways to create an exhibition about domicide and just depict rubble, right? And that's what we're seeing over and over and over again is a depiction of rubble. The problem with rubble is it is so effective at erasing any trace of what was there. And as a visual language, it also erases, I mean, yeah, the history of those places.
The life that was lived in each of those homes.
Exactly. And so it felt really, really important actually that when you enter this space, there is no depiction of rubble. I mean, actually, we'll get to it in the walls. We're kind of hinting at rubble a little bit. But I think that, you know, beautiful feels really important. You so rarely get to see inside, or some people so rarely, I'm Iraqi, some people so rarely get to see inside some of these homes. And so it also felt really important that visitors would get that kind of a glimpse, yeah.
So why don't we transition a bit to the walls? Because as I mentioned before, this is a show of installations, of immersive installations. And what to do with the walls was something that we discussed a lot. And that's probably, in terms of the development of the show, that's probably what we discussed the most, right? The models had a lot of clarity from the beginning, but the walls is something that developed over a longer period of time, and that we discussed a lot. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about where you landed on the walls, but also the process of getting there.
So there was like so much research that we had available to us through Gory's work, through Sam's work. And so this was one of my, Gory and I both love graphic novels. So it's like trying to think about graphic novel references and a way to kind of tell the story of these families. This was one of the first early drafts about Basim's home. It was built in 1994, took 3 years to finish, you know, really trying to tell the story. Just briefly, you can see here as well that I talked about the gardenias and roses. He was so in love with his gardens, which obviously creates a certain smell to home. And it also is an important reminder about this false distinction between domicide and ecocide. Like, you know, you're also destroying the landscape that comes with these places. Anyway, this is bad. This is really bad. It's bad because it's just asking way too much on the part of the viewer. I think it's not clear how you're going to digest this information. And in a museum space, the expectation that someone is going to stand there and read this amount of information for each of these 3 families was just unrealistic. So from there, we moved to, thanks Martina, this idea, which, okay, so we had initially been using, Sam had found photographs of the landscapes of like each of these cities, because we wanted to talk about how like, when you add up domicide, you get herbicide, right? These cities are destroyed. And so we were using these photographs, and I remember we went to Cooper Hewitt to like do a walkthrough to talk about like, you know, the use of these photographs. And Christina did a very sly thing. that I've since discovered that curators do, which is give me an idea and make me think it was my idea to like flatter my ego. It was very expertly done. And I ended up thinking that I had the idea to illustrate the seascapes, but actually Christina just planted it very expertly.
Just a suggestion.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've also learned a lot about it's not my first time doing something in a museum space, but it has been a real learning curve as well, working with a curator and really seeing how, you know, a good curator kind of gets in your way when you're about to do something dumb and then gets out of your way when you're going to have a good idea, which is like exactly what happened.
That's a very generous way of describing curatorial work.
So anyway, this was quite late in the game, if you remember, like we didn't have much time left. And so actually the desire to draw these entire cities was quite stressful, but we went ahead and did it. And then we thought about kind of putting these stories above the city, which we were also trying to allude a little bit to this idea of surveillance, right? Like the actual illustrations are probably like this big, and then up on the wall, like as you see, the wall is 215 square foot. So everything is really, really zoomed out. So you really get this, actually zoomed in, sorry. So you really get this sense of looking very, very closely at it. Yeah, we still didn't feel like this worked. It's just still too many words to basically expect on the part of the viewer. So from there, we also added color. This is Mosul. And then the next one is, this is Manbij. The cityscape, and this is Gaza. And again, these cities give you such a beautiful, again, using reference photos as I do in all of my work, it's not like an act of imagining. And you just see so much that's in here. You know, you see the hospitals as you're drawing this, you see mosques, you see churches, you see like, you know, boats. It's so beautiful to work from these reference photos, and like yeah, and then from there this data visualization component, which we kept on talking about, that was really challenging actually, because by the time I'd spent all of this time drawing the cities, I really didn't want to have them disappear, you know. And so what we landed at was removing the ink from, so it's a data visualization in the sense that 70% of the city has been effectively kind of removed to the viewer. And we've done this for the 3 cityscapes in the space. But I didn't want to have it fade out completely. And yeah, in actually, it's quite powerful. In removing the ink, you kind of lose a sense a little bit of what you're looking at. So on another one, for example, in the Mosul one, there's like a car park. And once you remove the outlines of the cars, it just looks like it's kind of a blur. And that to me also hints at rubble, right? This idea that the distinction between these different elements is gone and everything kind of just gets conflated. Yeah, and then that last image is just, yeah, the vinyls once they're up. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked a lot about what type of information can be put on the wall, what was digestible. I think also one of the things we discussed in quite a lot of detail was what could we very effectively present to the visitor. And I think one of the things that we all kept discussing over and over again was the percentage of the destruction. And, you know, when you're organizing an exhibition, there are going to be things that you're going to battle it out over. You know, we had a lot of discussion about making sure the stories of each of the families was very present. That was one of the reasons why we had discussed and you all have presented sharing some text onto the walls. But that's not the full story, right? That's just part of it. And thinking about how much information to share, how much information will be effectively shared in the models, in the walls, was, you know, a dance we did for months, really. And I think in the end where we landed, which was a paring back, which is, it's very hard as a curator to say like a little less, particularly when you're talking about stories that are so powerful, that are so latent with emotion. You know, we're talking a lot about data, but it's also these are real people's stories. These are real lives. These are real cities. And the responsibility of sharing that with the public is quite great. And thinking about the best way to do it was, I think, a big challenge for all of us that were involved, and landing on something that felt both powerful, but also spoke to both the larger impact of the city being destroyed and the personal impact. I think really effectively came across in where you all landed. So I think this is maybe perhaps we're good with time. All right. To open it up for some Q&A. So I think Ben says that if you have a question, you can come here to the mic.
Yeah, there's a microphone right here if you want to step up.
Hello. Hi, everyone. God bless you. I'm a little late, but from what I was listening to when you said about the fading, I love that because I feel like we all have paradial where we're looking for facial recognition. And I think it's a job for the artist for the person that's viewing it to do a little work too, for their brain to be able to see, and then they become a part of the artist, and then we share it together. Because if not, then it's like this world that they can't, and that's kind of how they look at us. So it's beautiful what you're doing. Like I said, I'm just coming, so I didn't see it all, but I feel the energy. I love y'all. And keep going. And God bless you, okay?
Yeah, I think ideally, again, with those cityscapes, there is a bit of an active imagining that's baked in where you can imagine, hopefully, without too much effort, what it would look like if that city hadn't been destroyed. Yeah. And ideally, again, to look at these homes, you can imagine what they would look like if they weren't destroyed.
And this image, in the end, you know, we wanted the homes to sort of feel like they were in their proper landscape. And so here you see the Mosul home with the Mosul landscape in the back. So being able to kind of have them part of their city.
Hello, my name is Rochelle Mehdi. I am really interested in why the topic of domicide, like how did it fit in you mentioned 3 categories. How does it fit in seeking home when it's, home was there, but it's the destruction of home? And then just very quickly, I want to say, just thank you. This is so pertinent in the times we are in, which I think it's not just this specific show that's part of what's on display in the museum, but also very pertinent for me as an individual. I'm Lebanese American. My family home is in the South as well as in Dahya. I have videos of my grandparents' home, like in my family group chat, that has recently been destroyed in the last 6 weeks. So just thank you for shedding light on this. And it's obviously not unique to Lebanon. It's happened across a continuum of time in so many different places.
Thank you for that question, and for sharing your story. Seeking home, as I shared in the beginning, is really an expansive floor when thinking about home. It's about both trying to find your home, to situate your home, but it's also about displacement in many ways. You're in some of the installations, it's a focus about people and objects and things in areas that perhaps they shouldn't be. Like, that is their home, but maybe it shouldn't be their home. And in this case, in domicide, I think part of this, in sharing the fact that these homes have been destroyed, but not showing them destroyed, you can also infer the fact that these families are still seeking either reparations, or also seeking to find their place, because in many cases they've had to leave their home. And so trying to find home again once it's been destroyed is also part of the discussion that we wanted to have on that floor. Thanks for that question.
Thank you for your work. I've been following SITU for a long time, and it's really impressive. Asking as a Ukrainian who's been working with refugees since day 2 of the war, who's been asking everyone to photograph their homes before they leave, how has this project impacted your ideas around the burden of forensic documentation on the people in conflict zones? Is it a form of agency, expected self-surveillance, or a lack of formal resources in other ways?
Thank you. That's a great question. I don't know if I have a good answer for that. I do think that as someone who does this forensics work, there's never been, we work with the expectation and anticipation that there won't be any of this documentation. I don't think that's something that we would ever think is appropriate to ask people to do, because it is extractive and self-surveillance, as you described. The fact that people share that with us, and it's important that they share it with us and allow us to use it in these very public ways. I think that's the way we've been operating and continue to do so.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Zahra Nasrallah, a child of Iraqi displaced parents, and as someone who also does research with displaced folks, specifically through the Iraqi diaspora, I know that when I'm doing these interviews, I'm so drained afterwards emotionally. So I wanted to see if you guys could talk about or reflect on that, the after process or that personal journey after you've spoken to all these folks. I was also wondering through this process if you guys have found home through making these models of homes that you may not have lived in, but I'm sure you've modeled them for hours and you've been working on these models for hours and hours, and I'm sure that you have found home through these objects. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely draining. I don't really have any advice for how to deal with that other than to just sit with the exhaustion. I think I'm quite acutely aware that however tired I am, actually very often the people that I'm speaking to and interviewing are actually left also very, very exhausted by the interview process. And I want to be so careful with their time and their emotions. Like, yeah, if someone's sitting there and asking you, wait, explain exactly where the coffee table is in relation to the couch of this home that you've it's really, yeah, it was so laborious. Maybe if you go back to the Morsel home, yeah, this one, this was after, I think I spoke to Basim here for maybe an hour and a half. What was the fabric of that chair? How long had you had it for? In such great detail. I would say that it's interesting. I actually went back to Iraq while I was working on this project and stayed actually in the home that my mum grew up in. So that was nice because it hasn't been destroyed by US weapons, thankfully. And yeah, I think that my feelings on home have very much changed in the process of working on this. I mean, on a unnecessary personal note, I've been in the US for 10 years and I'm leaving in 10 days indefinitely. I don't know. I love how everyone I tell is just like, get out. It was a decision that I took like 3 months ago, but yeah, I really want to rethink home a little bit for myself. Yeah.
Just to quickly add, in looking at your illustrations of the stories of the family, I mean, they didn't make it into the exhibition, but Mona really illustrated so much and in so much detail these stories, and that I wasn't part of the interview process at all, but it just suddenly intimately knew about these families and their attachment to home. So yeah, that was unexpected, and yeah, I hope the drawings make it out somehow.
Thank you so much for this project. It's extremely moving. Could you tell us a little bit about the process of the interviews that you conducted? Because interviewing someone about a home that they've lost or the home that they've lost can seem so all-encompassing and overwhelming. So how did you go about that interview? And because you did these interviews with these people, did you consider at some point in the project to have maybe their quotes or part of their audio or something represented along with their homes?
I don't know what the first part was. Sorry, about the process of interviewing them. Oh yeah, that we discussed internally what the question should be. And it was a relatively short list of questions. I want to say it was maybe like 9 or something. And it was, we had, again, obviously done research before we started these, but it was questions like, for example, can you tell me about memories that you have had in your home? Can you tell me about what your home smells like? What are the views that you have when you look outside of the windows of your home? Because I think that actually forms part of home as well, what exists outside of it. So in the case of the Gaza home, it doesn't totally make sense in the model. It was a bit of a stretch, but like there's the kitchen, and behind the kitchen we've actually drawn trees because they described an orchard that was outside of the window, and the mother who lived there would wash the dishes and look at the trees outside of the window. So yeah, they were very, very wide ranging. I should say also in the case of Gaza, I didn't speak to anyone on the phone, partly again because of internet connectivity issues and just wanting to be super, super sensitive and giving people the space to really reply exactly as they wanted to. So those were questions that were emailed across. Yeah. Second part.
Adding the quotes and other, yeah, I think in the graphic novel version of the wall treatment, that was definitely the intention. And adding those other sensory elements, we had conversations about that. We also doused some of the fabric in essential oils. I don't know how much that has lasted, but there was an attempt.
Hi, thank you all so much for this project. You spoke a bit about this, but the trauma that these people were probably very likely experiencing, talking you through their stories. Can you speak to what you think might have motivated their willingness to speak with you all and participate, and if they've had a chance to react, what their reactions are to this exhibit and project as a whole?
It's really hard to say in some cases. You don't normally ask people, why did you say yes to this? Because sometimes it makes it really reinforces that it's kind of a weird thing to do and then they'll run. But I often think that as a journalist, why would someone take a chance on speaking to me? I think in the case of Basim, as I said, he's really, really campaigned and worked to raise the visibility of his case. So he understands his contribution to this exhibition is kind of an extension of that. The man that we spoke to, the father in Syria, was also tied to Joanna Naples Mitchell's organization. So he is also doing work on making sure that there's compensation for families. So again, he has a bit of an interest in that. Gaza, I'll be honest, I think that the family were a little bit skittish, understandably. You know, to speak to journalists there is, I mean, most people are living with a death sentence anyway, but it just further accelerates that. And so the trust that is placed on us to make sure, they asked to be anonymous, but, you know, are these journalists really, really going to honor that? And at one point, actually, the daughter of so it was an entire family that was living there. It's a 3-floor building. The daughter who was living there is actually doing a PhD in the US at the moment. So I was corresponding with her a lot. And at one point she said, I've changed my mind. I no longer want to be a part of it, which honestly was quite stressful. That sounds really, really awful to say, but we'd spent so many hours and had invested so much money as well in building these models. But I also want to honor that as a completely legitimate response. And I think you have the right to actually say no at any point. But my response was to just send her more images and more information about the exhibition so that she would feel more empowered and clear about what it was that we were trying to do. And thank God she changed her mind. But I'm just so grateful. Yeah, I really don't know why people speak to journalists. I think that, no, but seriously, it makes me really, really cautious, because I think actually quite often people have this quite hopeful, and I don't think this is the case in Gaza at all, or actually in any of the families that we spoke to. you know, let's say I'm doing an interview about, I don't know, somebody's ability to access food stamps or something, and they're speaking to me, and you can tell there's this hope actually that by this article being published, something is radically going to change in their lives. And I know that's not the case. And so, I mean, you hope that something will change, but it's you know, so you have to find ways to be transparent about that and adjust people's expectations while also not scaring them off. It's really hard, yeah.
Yeah, hi. Raymond Lotta from Revolution Books in Harlem. I want to say that I just found this presentation incredibly informative, beautiful to see these artistic representations, and also maddening because there is this genocide that is going on, that is escalating. And one of the messages that I think all of us have to take from this is that we have to step up the fight to stop this genocide. And this is the great responsibility that we have, and what you've put before us just underscores it. I mean, all the sides, the herbicides, the ecocide, and also the UN rapporteurs have spoken of scholasticide, the conscious destruction of the educational infrastructure of Gaza, the universities, the schools, the teachers being wiped out. And this just calls to mind Bob Avakian, the revolutionary leader's statement that we can no longer afford to allow these imperialists to dominate the world and determine the direction of humanity. They must be overthrown as soon as possible. And it is a scientific fact that humanity does not have to live this way. And I would encourage people to come to Revolution Books. My question, in light of what I'm saying and what I'm learning from you, is that the models that you're putting up here, you know, are speaking both to the basic human needs of shelter, but also the historical memory and the present day existence of a people. Because the Zionists want to depopulate. They want to destroy, and they want to destroy every evidence of a Palestinian people so that they can make their case that there is no such thing as a Palestinian. And the new appointment, Huckabee, you know, the Israeli ambassador from the US, is one of those who says there is no occupation, there is no Palestinian people. And I wanted to hear from you, here are your models, but then there is an actual Zionist project to reoccupy and resettle and to create a new architecture of occupation. So I'd like to hear what you think about, in other words, here's what you're putting forward. What is the Zionist program now in light of the actual, you know, the actual project that, you know, that they have to depopulate and to destroy? And I just want to emphasize our responsibility to stop this genocide.
I'll just start, if that's okay, to like really quickly grab the microphone. On the scholasticide point, I did create an illustration a while ago actually showing how literacy rates in Palestine are higher than they are here in the US. And I think that should, I mean, the fact that, again, this government has the money to be able to send military weapons to Israel, but not to educate its own population, I think is really, really telling. And on, I think you used the words the Zionist project. I'm just going to go ahead and use those too. It's worth mentioning that, you know, Gaza is, in each case, we've taken just one city here, right, for this project. Domicide is also happening in the West Bank, but in a very, very different way, as I'm sure you know. Settler violence is its own form of domicide that is state sanctioned and is an effort to extend the boundaries of Israel. And so I'm not really sure if I've really answered your question, except that, yeah, the new architecture that will exist in these places will look different to the architecture that was there. Another way, actually, that domicide is perpetrated in the West Bank and in Gaza is through either forced demolitions or claims from the Israeli government that these buildings aren't up to code. They never provide any evidence of why. They just say these structures are illegitimate, they're not safe, and then they go ahead and demolish them. And I'm sure you've seen videos of just families just arriving home and there are just bulldozers there saying, yeah, that's it, you've got to go. So I don't want to, you know, I also want to capture like the full breadth of everything that's happening, and not all of it is bombs falling from the skies.
Second. I really love this project. It's so beautiful and so moving. And I think a lot about home. And my grandmother is Palestinian from Jaffa, and we spend so much time trying to find her home and have photos. We have this photo of her house at home. And I'm just wondering, while you were doing your interviews, how people spoke about the pride they have of the homes they built, the joy that they experience in these homes, moments of laughter. Like, I'm just kind of thinking as a journalist, how it was important for them to remember to what their home felt like and have that immersive experience.
Yeah, thank you. I love that question. It comes out in all kinds of different ways, right? So many people talked about how clean their homes were and how much time they spent keeping their homes clean, which is like one of the easiest forms of love you can show to your home, right? Is just keeping it clean. And then, yeah, you're going to go to Mosul. Yeah, I thought so. Yeah. So Basim also described in detail, for example, this chandelier, he found it in a market 10 years before his home was actually built. He just fell in love with it and always saved it for one day he was going to hang it in his home because the home that he had at the time wasn't large enough for it. And he also describes in such beautiful detail, he described how this front hallway is double, what do you call it when it's like double height. And he described how there are these curtains in front of the doorway and how twice a year his wife would want him to take them down, climb up on a ladder and take them down so that she could wash them. And he was like, I was always terrified to climb up this ladder, and I would always be like, can we just leave the curtains where they are? And she would be like, no, you have to climb up the ladder, I want to wash them. And so he would climb up them, and then he was like describing how he then had to climb back up to put them back up. But it was such a beautiful story of love for his wife, love for his home, her love for the home, their love for their children, to keep the home as beautiful as possible. It was just such a small anecdote that I just thought said so much as well about what was lost, not just those curtains, but also his wife.
Hi, such a beautiful project. I'm wondering what was missing, what was the most glaring pieces of documentation and data and things like that that are missing. And also, I feel like there must be a lot of like policymakers, a lot of lawyers, journalists in the room. I'm a journalist. Wondering what we could do if this project was like a 5-year-long project, a 10-year-long project. What else would you look at, and what needs to be explored?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I'm not a journalist, but I think using the primary sources to draw attention to the systematic nature of how this destruction happens. You were talking about the West Bank. That's happening at a policy level, right? And right now there's an accountability sink, I think is the term, because it's a system. People are following literal worksheets to determine whether or not to drop a bomb on a particular site. And I think there needs to be a reckoning about how the US military is engaging in this armed conflict all over the world. And there has to be some accountability of how, the policy level, every civilian casualty report that I read over and over again, they're investigating themselves, and the person followed the process to the letter. There's nothing wrong with the process. Basim's home was described as an administrative oversight, right? That's what it was described as. They used only an hour and 30 minutes of surveillance footage taken in like half-an-hour chunks. So the whole system is rotted. And I think in order for there to be change, drawing attention as journalists, pointing to these specific documents and the way that they describe it themselves, I mean, it's just sick, actually. And the same is true with like the arms trade, right? I think for the Gaza project, the amount of munitions the US has sent in this past year is incredible in the worst way. And the difference between the documentation and the transparency of how it's reported when you compare it to Ukraine is also shocking, right? So I think there's very obvious gaps in the information that we receive about all of these things that need to be addressed.
Hello, amazing work. It really combines storytelling and art beautifully. I'm just curious to know whether there was like any talks about using AI as a tool to imagine what these homes looked like uh, before, like in the past, externally, of course. And is there any rubbles, like reference to rubbles in the exhibition? Just curious.
Yeah, in terms of the installation, with the exception of the data visualizations on the walls, there is no reference to rubble. And actually, that was one of the very first things that we discussed, that Mona and the SITU team said, you know, very clearly that they did not want to do an installation that showed rubble, that showed destruction, that they wanted the installation to talk about life and what was lost. Because most of the time when you see rubble, you know, there's nothing there, there's destruction. So from the very beginning, the show was about sharing the humanity of all of these stories, of showing the life of cities, of helping the visitor to imagine these places that frankly no longer exist as they are shown in the space. And walking into the space and encountering these visuals, and without us necessarily, you know, hitting you over the head with every single fact or a play-by-play, but for you to walk in and feel it and read it and see it, and in some cases smell it, in each of these homes, I think is where the power lays in this installation.
Yeah, and I don't think, well, I might be wrong, but I don't think we ever thought of using AI, especially for the interiors. You know, for some rooms we had photographs, but you know, we were trying to represent the fuzziness of memory, but not in kind of by doing it with like an image processing model. So it was really Mona kind of doing that work of imagining based on the family's descriptions and their memories and their recollections. And I don't think we ever wanted a machine in the mix, because it was about showing the life and the humans that lived in these places.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think we actually really didn't want to use AI. AI, when it comes to the Middle East in particular, is problematic at best, because it's baked in to all of the existing racism and biases and then just regurgitates them. And the reason why I'm just quickly grabbing the microphone is because yesterday I wanted to just work on something else. I wanted to draw an Iraqi man in a kafaya. We also have kafayas. In fact, one of the theories is that the word kafaya comes from Kufa in Iraq. But anyway, just side note. Little bit controversial. Anyway, so I just wanted to Google Iraqi man in cafe, and these images were coming up that were super weird, and they were being pulled from AI. And there was a child, they kept on showing an Iraqi man with child, according to the AI, but the child had a beard, and it was like a small. And I realized that AI doesn't know what an Iraqi child looks like, which is really, really fucking chilling. Yeah, kind of tells you everything you need to know. They're all just obviously just men ready to become terrorists according to AI. Yeah.
Hello. It's really beautiful to see all of the care that you all very clearly put into this. I'm really excited to go see it. But I'm curious about how the process of doing a materialization and a data physicalization essentially has maybe influenced all of your researches, you know, or your going forward, like how this has influenced you as a data journalist or as a, you know, data artist, as a researcher, and how you sort of see it maybe staying with you and just influencing your practice.
Thank you for the question. After I worked on this project, I realized that I've been thinking about representing historical memory and memory in architectural models and space for a while. My thesis worked with projections and kind of recreating student protests in Mexico. And Sarah Illich, who also helped with the models, we did a kind of a joint investigation, and she was also working with transparencies and how transparencies and models represent memory. And so it was just kind of a natural fit. And I don't think I've quite processed how those two come together. But yeah, I especially in the world of architecture and models being, that we make models quite cleanly, and as you can see, like the white. So yeah, I think it's just gonna. I think these models challenge what an architectural model can be and what they can do and the agency that they can have, because they're often quite passive tools. So yeah, I'm excited to keep exploring that in other projects. Thank you.
For one more question, and we're here also at the front if you want to come down afterwards, but we're hitting our wrap up time. Thank you.
Hi, I'm really interested in, I guess, the element of memory here, as well as the aspect of storytelling, which is so rich in Palestinian culture and Arab culture in general. But I was wondering, when you were interviewing these families, was there a certain memory that perhaps was like more fleeting for them or harder to remember, or were there things that specifically that like that easily came to people's minds, whether that be like the physical things or the emotional things? And yes, I guess how I felt.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if it's about a fleeting memory necessarily, but I will just say that like not all of the memories that people have in their homes are unambiguously positive, but that doesn't kind of diminish them. So again, the family in Gaza, one of the memories that the daughter described to me was actually that while her father was dying, they took care of him at home. And that's like incredibly, incredibly painful, but it also makes the home even more important because your very last memories of this family member are all of you together in that space. So yeah, I'll just say that. And I'm also just going to say, just in case it's the last opportunity to say, I know you mentioned all of the other artists that are a part of the exhibition, but the entire exhibition is incredible. I also feel really, really grateful that we are close to an installation by some Puerto Rican artists, which feels like it's kind of loosely in dialogue with ours, which I know was no accident. And just, yeah, I'm so grateful to have been a part of this. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for coming.